Battlecats has always had a huge arrangement of super rares in the game, about 100 plus, with the number increasing with each update version. Honestly, I've always thought Ponos, the company that made the game, has always pumped up too many Ubers to the point where a lot of them become less and less unique, with more Ubers coming out, and Ubers covering the same traits and the newer ones that are just made off to show off a new ability, which has made me kind of grow to dislike the whole rarity in general. But the one Uber that stuck out to me is the topic of today's video, and I'll discuss why I personally like him so much. You probably know who it is. It's a Grateful Crane, or Super Galaxy Cosmo, as most people call him. This unit has always been my favorite because of his unique design, and his attack animation have the second longest attack animation, only behind Filibuster Cat, as well as having a huge range and a lot of other factors that make him special to me specifically. I mean, just look at mine and see his level, so you already know why I like him so much. So now, let's discuss why it's my favorite unit in the entire game. The Grateful Crane is an Uber super rare inside the Ancient Heroes Ultra Souls Gacha banner, released February 28th in 2015. These type of Ubers are usually cheap mid-range attackers in their first form. Then in their second and third form, they become more expensive and have higher stats. All these Ubers are based on Japanese mythologies, but that's all you need to know about them. First form is called the Grateful Crane, and he looks like an oval-shaped cat with a crane's head as a hat and with two wings on his arms. It's a basic design, but it works for such a small cat. Next up, I will talk about his stats. In his first form, he boasts these stats shown here at level 30. The Grateful Crane has 9,435 health and 4,080 damage, with the low range of 200 with the fast attacking speed and a low cooldown. Honestly, from looking at his stats for a few seconds, you see why you shouldn't be using this unit in his first form, ever due to his poor health and damage and everything in general being bad. Maybe you can find a way to cheese the stage in the early game, like against Cyclone stages and maybe some niche melee pushes that he arranges. You could technically use him as a crowd controller, but his low health, low range, and his attack frequency is really short, so maybe you could juggle an enemy with a research up combo, but he's generally not really good at his job, so I certainly would recommend using his first form. After his first form comes his second form. His second form, Super Galaxy Cosmo, gains a huge boost in stats for everything in his kit. His second form gives him 650 extra range, more health and more DPS, and way more speed. When hearing this, you might think he sounds busted, but you're wrong, because the opponents did to balance this out is the fact that he has a 20.67 attack frequency, which is basically the time before his attack actually lands, when he's preparing it. His design becomes more human, like with a really good looking armor, also keeping the crane head as well, and giving some wings. Honestly, that has to be the most peak design in the Battlecats. Like, come on, you're gonna tell me when you look at his attack you don't get excited to see him do his little dance, or scroll out to see how truly his effects actually look when he's preparing his attack? And this, in my opinion, is what makes a unit memorable, especially when he clutches up and hits a sick hit that saves your base from dying. In this form, this is where he gains an actual role in the game, according to the wiki. He's considered a super backliner. Super backliners are known for their immense amount of range, mostly low DPS, low health, and low speed, but they have crowd controlling abilities that help them stand their ground. Units like Nerdcat and Sniper to Deadeye fit under this category. Super Galaxy Cosmo at level 30 gains 27k health, 39k damage, and a whopping 850 range, which outranges most enemies in the game, but I had a weird interaction with one of them, but I'll get to that later. Since he outranges most enemies in the game, you'd think he'd be overpowered, but no. Super Galaxy Cosmo has 3 major downsides that deter him from being in the meta. First is a super long attack animation taking about 10.7 seconds to go off, at the cost of 5,850 cents and a high speed, so when he often runs past your meat shield and gets hit. A lot of people see this why Cosmo isn't as good, but personally I see his attack animation time as an upside most of the time. The reason why I say this is because of his long windup and his long range. You can start his attack really early, and when enemies start pushing and get near him, you can blast him in the face with a lot of damage. But with that out of the way, let's get into his 3 major downsides. Due to his recharge being so high, having about 140 to 131.2 seconds of respawn, depending on your recharge levels, this time is really long, and since Cosmo does have the most amount of HP, if enemies push into him too much, you can die pretty easily. It'll take him a while for you to get him back. But there shouldn't be too much of an issue if you're fighting his target traits, which are Angel and Floating. If you've been paying attention enough, you'd realize that he has a 100% chance to knock back Angel and Floating enemies. These traits are pretty common in early game, like in Swords of Legend or Into the Future, and is insanely helpful in certain stages where enemies tend to push, and a simple knockback can be all you need to survive in stages. Honestly, in hindsight, his second form isn't that bad due to his high range. It can easily make him fairly usable on a ton of stages, but greater comes in his true form. You know how I mentioned a while back that Cosmo has a weird interaction with a certain enemy in this game? That enemy is Sunfish Jones, and at first when looking at his range, you might think, okay, Cosmo outranges Sunfish Jones. What's the issue? Well, since Cosmo has a really high speed stat, sometimes he can stand where he isn't supposed to due to the Battlecatcher running at 30 FPS. It can cause lag and make him start his attack animation at a shorter distance, just to slip into Sunfish Jones' range. Honestly, this topic is really hard to explain and can be a whole entire video in itself. If you want to see a more in-depth video, I'll link a Lucas the 4th video in the description. But don't watch that video yet, just do it after this one. Lastly, on his true form, Super Galaxy Cosmo is now named Ultimate Galaxy Cosmo. In his true form, he gains more armor around his body, while the armor gains a yellow to bluish tint on it, and gets better looking effects in his attack animation. He gains more damage, increasing his total DPS by 40%, bringing his DPS to 2,754 from 1,938 DPS at level 30, while gaining the ability to freeze angel and floating enemies as well as for 5 seconds. But first, his stupid true form requirements costing 1 million XP and 30 yellow cat fruits and 10 epic fruits. This might be opponents making the dumbest decision of their lives, but it's understandable since he's the GOAT, so who am I to judge? First off, when hearing about his true form, it doesn't sound like it's even worth the hassle to get, but I think most people overlook the free slash knockback combo. Since most people think knockback is a terrible card controlling move to have, even though they're right for the most part, I think most people always forget about his freeze for 5 seconds. That's a really long time. So when the enemies are done being frozen, he can immediately start his attack animation again when they begin their attack. You can even use Cosmo as a mini Doran as such when they're trying to rush down angel slash floating enemies down fast, since both their freeze timers are similar to each other. Or even when enemies push too far and you need some break time to gain some cash or some chip damage in for free, he can generally be useful in that regard, even though you rethink your strategy and let some important units or certain strategies come back without enemies being right in your base. When comparing Ultimate Galaxy Cosmo to other backliners in the game, I don't think he outshines Cyberpunk or Sniper and their respective fields, because we all know those two units are turbo OP and break most stages in the game. But he can help Cyberpunk because of his knockback ability, and since Cyberpunk has an LD ability, so when enemies are in his blind spot, he can push them back into it. But I do think he has more genuine niche uses, and is often better than other backliners due to his good base 2,754 damage at level 30 with a massive area attack. A lot of people undervalue him due to units like Aphrodite and Amaterasu being good generalists, but here's the thing, is that they don't have huge range like Cosmo helping his survivability immensely. Letting you stack multiple Cosmos if the stage length is long enough. When comparing him to Baluga, for example, another backliner, he has better stats in general in terms of health, damage, movement speed, and general survivability. Don't get me wrong, Baluga is a good backliner, but Cosmo tends to outshine him a lot of the time with his longer freeze time and his lower cooldown. Even Ashley Luga doesn't compare to him in terms of stats. Even though Ashley Luga has more range, his cooldown is super high and you would really screw it if he ever died on the battlefield due to his stats being similar to Ashley Luga's stats, since all Niku Lugas have horrid stats. First is Colossus Slayer. Honestly, this talent is pretty good. The reason why it's pretty good is because it increases his usages in terms of those stages. Since he outranges all of them, he will be pretty useful in terms of DPS and potential CC as well. But there is too much NP to counter mainly with 3 enemies that only 2 enemies are used in their specific stages. I'd only recommend getting this talent if you really need to counter these enemies in their specific stages. But that might be me being biased due to me never playing these stages since I hate them with a passion, and I made a promise to myself to never play them, ever. Second is Apply Curse talent, which is a pretty good talent to be honest, costing at 235 NP at max the curse's target rates for 10 seconds. It's a pretty good talent when the freeze is over since they can't counter our units as easily. Although this talent doesn't counter many angel or floating specific enemies specifically, but the talent is mainly great at countering relic floating enemies like Otham or even Loki. Even in some stages where opponents buffs Calamari to the extreme, getting rid of his weaken ability can genuinely be really useful, so your units can better rush him down. Or even countering Angelic Slipnir, so your Ramen Cats can stall better. Or Wing Piggy's really annoying weaken ability. Or even Gobble getting rid of his Toxic to get rid of his uptime. And it's huge in some Uncanny Legend stages, and can break a lot of them. Most people would think that this talent isn't that great due to Curse being a niche counter to specific enemies, but getting rid of enemies' pushing power in any way is helpful with this kind of range, making his compatibility with the Sniper Punk combo even better. Honestly, this talent is honestly worth the price as long as you're swimming in NP. I totally recommend getting it for anyone who wants to deal with annoying backliners, crowd controlling all of your units. Next up is Curse Immunity, costing 100 NP. Honestly, this talent is just to support his ability to counter relic safely, which means if you get cursed, the talent you should get rid of this one too. Nothing else to say about this one, just a niche one. And finally are the basic health and attack talents. These talents aren't that helpful to be honest, just your average stat boost. Get it if you want it. Lastly are his cat combos, which he only has 2 of them, which aren't really good or useful. The first one being Galactic Travel with Space Cat, giving a small movement speed buff. This combo sucks and there are no stages you will ever be using these units in synergy like ever. The second one is Dreams of Flying with Flying Ninja Cat, giving a small buff and knockback. This one sucks too. There's a reason why I didn't mention them, because both of these cat combos suck and they won't be used like ever. I hope this video has taught you why I see Cosmo as my favorite unit in the entire game, in terms of design and usages in game. If you disagree with me with anything I've ever said, or if I got wrong info, feel free to type in the comments. But next time you're having issues with floating or angel enemies, don't overlook him. He might be helpful in your strategies, even if they are cringe like Sniper Punk. Lastly, I'd ask you to subscribe to the channel because I'd like to get 100 subs. If I do end up hitting 100 subs, I'll make a follow-up video upgrading my Ultimate Galaxy Cosmo to level 60 with max talents. If you'd like to see that happen, subscribe. Thank you for your time and I'll see you in the next video.